Hello dear children. In today's video we will discuss on the topic Program and Achievements of the Early Nationalists. So please go through the video carefully. Program and Achievements of the Early Nationalists. The history of Indian national movement can broadly be divided into three phases. The early nationalist phase, which was from 1885 to 1907, the assertive phase from 1907 to 1916, and the Gandhian era from 1915 to 1947. In its initial years, the Congress was led by a group of leaders known as the Early Nationalists. The members of this group were drawn from the educated middle class consisting of professionals like lawyers, barristers, teachers, and officials who drew inspiration from Western liberal and radical thought. Many of them were educated in England and felt that the British intended to be just to Indians, but they were unaware of the true state of affairs in India. These leaders included W.C. Bannerjee, Raj Bihari Ghosh, Dadabhai Naoroji, Ranade, Gokhale, P.R. Naidu, Madan Mohan Malviya, A.O. Hume, etc. The early nationalist leaders who led the Congress and the national movement in its initial years were staunch believers in open-minded and moderate politics. They believed in loyalty to the British Crown. They asked for constitutional and other reforms within the framework of the British rule, as they had faith in the British sense of justice and fair play. They believed that continuation of the British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. They concerned themselves with the demand for reforms. Their demand were moderate in nature. Beliefs of the early nationalists. The early nationalists had faith in the sense of justice, fair play, honesty, and integrity of the British. It was their hope that British would grant home rule to Indians. They believed on the solemn pledges made by the British government. They believed that the British rule had many benefits. For example, it aided in cleansing social ills like sati, untouchability, and child marriage. They were of the opinion that Britain would help Indians govern themselves according to Western standards. They said that the main obstacle in India's progress was social and economic backwardness of Indians and not the British colonial rule. They relied on constitutional and peaceful methods to achieve their aims. They believed in patience and reconciliation rather than in violence and confrontation. Now we come to the demands of the early nationalists. Constitutional reforms. They wanted a larger share in the Indian government. They believed and aimed at winning freedom through a gradual process. The leaders demanded for abolition of Indian Council, the expansion of legislative council and legislative assemblies, increase Indians' numbers and their powers in various councils, and demanded for no taxation without representation. Economic reforms, reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants from unjust zamindars. Instead of spending money on army, the leaders demanded to spend money on welfare activities like health and education. They were concerned about India's growing poverty and famines, cheap credit for peasants through agricultural banks, development of banks, irrigation, medical facilities, developing industries like iron, sugar, coal, paper, etc. Administrative demands demanded for Indian civil service exams to be held at the same time in England and India. The early nationalists, they demanded for the making of executive and judiciary independent from each other. So the separation of the executive and judiciary as an independent body. Cancel Arms Act and License Act. Employment of Indians at higher administrative posts. Spread of primary education among masses and improving police system. Then defense of civil rights. Removal of restrictions on freedom of speech and freedom of press. Abolition of Preventive Detention Act and restoration of individual rights. Restoration of right to assemble and to form association. Methods of the early nationalists. The method, popularly known as constitutional agitation method, was followed by the early nationalists. They believed in the policy of constitutional agitation within the legal framework and slow, orderly political progress. The methods adopted by the early nationalists had two objectives. First set of methods. Their first objective was to educate people in India in modern politics, to arouse national political consciousness, and to create a united public opinion. For this purpose, they relied on the following methods. Number one, they held meetings where speeches were made and resolutions for popular demands were passed. Second, they made use of the press to criticize government policies. And third, they sent memorandums and petitions to government officials and the British Parliament. These petitions were carefully drafted with facts and arguments. Though these petitions were addressed to the government, their real aim was to educate the Indian people. The second set of methods of the early nationalists was to influence the British government and the British public. To achieve this objective, they followed the following methods. Number one, they made use of 3 P's, that is, petitions, prayers, and protests. They sent petitions, requests, and letters of protest to the British government to look into the problems of the Indians. Second, a British committee of the Indian National Congress was set up in London in 1889, which published a weekly journal, India, to present India's case before the British public. And third, deputations of Indian leaders were sent to Britain. These political leaders carried on active propaganda in Britain. For example, Dadabhai Naoroji spent a major part of his life in Britain to create awareness among British people and politicians about the plight of Indians. Achievements of the early nationalists. The early nationalists represented the most progressive force of the time. They made the following contributions to the Indian national movement. The first, the early nationalists created national awakening among people that they belong to one common country, India. This made Indians conscious of the bonds of common political, economic, and cultural interests that united them. Second, the early nationalists trained people in politics. Second, the early nationalists trained people in politics by popularizing the ideas of democracy, civil liberties, secularism, and nationalism. The early nationalists did
pioneering work by exposing the true nature of the British rule in India. They made people realize the economic content and character of British imperialism. By doing so, they weakened the foundations of the British rule in India. Their political and economic programs established the truth that India must be ruled in the interest of the Indians. The efforts of the early nationalists led to the following reforms. First, the appointment of the Public Service Commission in 1886. Secondly, a resolution of the House of Commons in 1893 for simultaneous examination for the ICS in London and India. Thirdly, the appointment of the Welby Commission of Indian Expenditure 1895, and fourthly, the Indian Councils Act of 1892. Now, these achievements of the early nationalists served as a base for the national movement in later years. The most prominent early nationalist leaders were Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and Surendranath Bannerjee. Dadabhai Naoroji, popularly known as the Grand Old Man of India, was born in a Parsi family in Mumbai on September 4, 1825. He worked as a professor of mathematics in Elphinstone College at Mumbai for 10 years. In 1855, he left the teaching profession and went to England as a partner in a firm. In 1869, he returned to Mumbai. He was elected to the Mumbai Municipal Corporation and later to the Town Council. He founded the Bombay Association, edited the newspaper Ras Guftar, also known as the Speaker of Truth. He started a magazine, Dharma Marg Darshak. He started movements against the Vernacular Press Act and the atrocious treatment of poor peasants by zamindars. He also contributed a lot to the Indians and to India. His first contribution was India's unofficial ambassador. During his stay in England, Dadabhai was looked upon as India's unofficial ambassador. Fighting for the cause of his country, in 1865 he founded the London India Society in collaboration with W.C. Banerjee to publicize grievances of Indians. He was the first Indian to become the member of the British House of Commons in England. While he was a member of the British Parliament, he brought to the notice of the House important matters related to India. He was in favor of appointing educated Indians to high posts. It was due to his efforts that in 1893 the House of Commons passed a resolution in favor of holding the ICS examination in England and India simultaneously. In 1866, he founded the East India Association in London. The East India Association soon became popular and its branches were set up in Kolkata, Mumbai and Chennai. The second contribution was his role in the Congress. Dadabhai's role in the Congress was praiseworthy. He took an active part in the foundation of the Indian National Congress and was elected its president thrice, in 1886, 1893 and 1906. Resolutions on self-government, boycott, Swadeshi and national education were passed by the Congress under his presidentship. The credit for demanding Swaraj from the Congress platform for the first time in 1906 goes to him. In his presidential address, he said that the Congress wanted self-government or Swaraj like that of the United Kingdom or the colonies. The third contribution, he exposed the economic ills of India. As an economic thinker, he came to the conclusion that the root cause for the economic ills of India was the exploitation of India by the British. Dadabhai's views on Indian economy are given in his work entitled Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. His famous drain theory explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through various ways. Dadabhai passed away in 1917, leaving behind a lesson of selfless service to the nation. The second great leader, or the second great early nationalist, was Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Gopal Krishna Gokhale was born at Kolhapur in Maharashtra in 1866. He was a professor of history and economics at Fergusson College in Pune. He was influenced by the ideals of Justice M.G. Ranade. He joined the Deccan Education Society, founded by Justice Ranade. On behalf of the society, he went to England to propagate Indian views before the Welby Commission. He was awarded the title of CIE, that is, the Companion of the Indian Empire. Gokhale became the most popular leader of the Indian National Congress. He presided over the Varanasi session of the Congress in 1905. Having faith in the British liberalism, he said, "The goal of the Congress should be the attainment of a form of government similar to which existed in the self-governing colonies of the British Empire." His contributions: the first one, he persuaded the British for reforms. Gokhale favored the use of constitutional means to achieve his goals. He opposed the policies of the British government whenever necessary. He criticized the government on issues such as incurring huge expenditure on British Army, adopting the policy of racial discrimination in appointments to high posts, imposing production tax on cotton. He made a strong plea for the reform of legislative councils and separation of judiciary from the executive. He played an important role in the passage of Minto Morley reforms. He also served as a member of the Indian Public Service Commission and urged it to increase the share of Indians in higher services. During his visit to England, he tried to persuade the British statesmen not to give effect to the partition of Bengal. The second contribution: Gokhale set up the Servants of India Society in 1905. The main aim of the society was to train national leaders who would dedicate themselves to the service of India. Some of the important members of the society were Srinivas Shastri and Hridaynath Kunzru. The third contribution: his role as a member of Imperial Legislative Council. In 1902, Gokhale became the member of the Imperial Legislative Council. He pleaded in the council for reduction in salt duty and the abolition of excise duty on cotton goods. His relentless efforts led to reduction in toll tax. He tried to introduce a bill with a view to make primary education compulsory, but he could not achieve much success in it. Being an economist, he demanded radical changes in the fiscal policy and better jobs for the educated middle class. He impressed upon the government to reduce the land revenue. Gokhale went to South Africa, where he helped Gandhiji in his fight against racial discrimination. The credit of persuading Gandhiji to return to India and join Indian public life also goes to Gokhale. In fact, Gandhiji accepted Gokhale as his political mentor. Gokhale died on February 15, 1915, when his popularity was at its peak. And now we come to Surendranath Bannerjee. Another great early nationalist. Surendranath Bannerjee was a nationalist leader, popular journalist, and a dedicated educationist. He was born in Bengal in 1848. He was the first Indian to qualify for the Indian Civil Service examination. He worked as a magistrate in Assam, but he was soon dismissed because he opposed the policy of racial discrimination followed by the British. Surendranath began his career as a professor of English at the Metropolitan College. He set up his own school, which later developed into Ripon College. Surendranath was elected to the Calcutta Corporation and remained its member for nearly 2 decades. He was elected to the Bengal Legislative Council 4 times. In 1921, he was appointed as Minister of Self-Government and held by the Governor of Bengal. He was the first Indian to hold that position. He advocated use of constitutional methods for the attainment of India's goals. His famous saying was, "Opposition where necessary, cooperation where possible." His contributions were: he established the Indian Association. To fight against the wrong policies of the British, he founded the Indian Association in 1876. Its aim were to educate the people, to create strong public opinion in the country, and to arouse political consciousness and unity. Second contribution of Surendranath Bannerjee was, in order to create an all-India political organization, Surendranath convened the Indian National Conference in 1883 at Kolkata. Surendranath Banerjee's Indian National Conference merged with the Indian National Congress in 1886, as both organizations had similar objectives. He presided over 2 sessions of the Congress in 1895 and 1902. The third contribution, his political ideas. Banerjee edited a newspaper, Bengali, which served as a powerful medium for mobilizing public opinion. His book, Nation in the Making, gives an account of his political concern and his views about self-government. Banerjee started agitation against the License Act, Arms Act, Vernacular Press Act, and against lowering the age from 21 to 19 years to appearing in the ICS examination. He opposed the Mole-Minto reforms of 1909, which introduced separate electorates for the Hindus and the Muslims. He also opposed the division of Bengal by Lord Curzon in 1905. Banerjee, popularly known as the father of Indian nationalism, breathed his last in 1925.